Hello, I'm Mansi Shah.
And I'm Josh Marker. And you're listening to ClimateStack, the podcast where we explore the intersection between technology and climate action.
Welcome, everyone, to the very first episode of ClimateStack. On ClimateStack, we hope to inspire you folks to see that working on a mission-driven climate problem is no different than working at any tech startup, both in terms of the skills you need and the innovative challenges you're going to face. And I honestly couldn't have asked for a better guest than Peetak to drive this point home for us. Peetak Mitra is a San Francisco based technologist with a long AI ML pedigree. He's on the founding team of Excarta, a venture backed startup building an AI powered weather intelligence platform. Prior to Excarta, he was a member of the research staff at Xerox PARC and has worked on AI climate forecasting for both DARPA and NASA. He's also involved with a nonprofit institute called ClimateChange.AI, and I'm looking forward to hearing about his varied views on this topic of intersection between climate action and AI. So, Peetak, really welcome to our show, and thank you for being a guinea pig to do this with us.
Thank you so much, Mansi. Thank you, Joshua, as well. I'm really excited to be here. And as you said, excited to be the guinea pig and looking forward to our conversations. I think it's going to be great. But before we go ahead, I wanted to congratulate the both of you to start this initiative. I think you both have had storied careers in tech, and I think the audience would enjoy a lot learning from you all, but also from the other guests. I think I'm really excited for the mission of this particular podcast and how it will inspire listeners to explore exciting careers at the forefront of the fight against climate change.
Well, thank you for those very kind words, Peetak. You've done so many different things in the climate space. I mean, what Mansi listed was actually only a subset of Peetak's career. So this makes you a really excellent person to ask, what has climate change AI become? I mean, that's a combines a lot of words, a lot of very broad words. Who's part of that community, and what work is being done at Climate Change AI overall?
Absolutely. I think this is a very exciting space to be in. There are various different operators in the space. You have companies that are at the forefront of, building new technologies that improve efficiencies. For example, in the domain of the electric grids, making them more efficient, more resilient by using AI as a tool, and a lot of reinforcement learning goes in there and stuff like that. But also there are very many investors, VCs. There are a lot of accelerators as well that just focus on building and scaling technologies in this particular space. And there are obviously an up-to number of amazing engineers and scientists that have given up careers in big tech, given up careers who are very comfortable to actually come and build some massive solutions that the world really needs. There are some estimates that the next few big trillion-dollar companies would come from climate tech space, and I think you can just see the energy. You can go to any event at the SF Climate Week or any event elsewhere in this particular space, and you would see the energy that is just through the roof. I've never seen that before.
Do you also mind telling us about the Climate Change AI as the nonprofit organization that's doing a lot of interesting work in this space? And I'm actually enrolled in their summer school right now. So I'm super excited to hear more about them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So, Climate Change AI, it's a global nonprofit that aims to catalyze impactful work at the intersection of AI and climate change. So, basically, think of it as a framework or a platform where the members are interested in exploring how AI as a tool can affect different aspects of climate change, from climate change mitigation, from climate change adaptation, or even better understanding the climate itself from climate science perspective, like how the under different SSP scenarios, how the future climate of the world would look like globally as well as very regionally. In terms of who are part of this, I think there are folks from various different skill levels and expertise. So we have folks that are scientists at government labs or industrial labs in the US and all over the world, scientists and engineers from these groups, but also a lot of academics, professors, students, graduate students, undergraduate students, and even some high school students who are very passionate about using AI for climate change. But also there are, folks such as myself who are working and building technologies in this space, startups or companies that are actively using AI, in their day-to-day work in the fight against climate change. And also there are a lot of other folks who are in jobs or in professions that do not necessarily interact with AI and climate change that much, but they have great interest in learning about it and are very valuable members of the community as well. And as you pointed out, the way Climate Change AI works is that to serve the mission, they have a multi-pronged approach, which is to educate. Part of it is through the summer school program that we just mentioned, where I'll be teaching a course next week on AI and weather. And the other stuff is to also write very impactful papers. There was a paper written by the core group of Climate Change AI in 2019, 2020 that formed the basis of this movement. It was called Tackling Climate Change with Machine Learning, a fantastic review paper for those who have not read it, into how AI can be used as an effective tool and an impactful tool in different aspects of fighting against climate change. And it's a fantastic read for anybody looking to learn more about this space. In terms of other ways they engaged with the community, they have built community. For example, there is a climate-centric social platform on Circle that folks can come and talk to other professionals as well as find collaborators. That's how I met Vivek, who started Excarta initially, and then I joined him on the founding team. And the other ways that a Climate Change AI also operates is they do a lot of advocacy. And lastly, they also do give out grants to advance the state of the art. So they work with organizations like DeepMind, others who fund research grants to academics and research institutions that advance the state of the art in trying to better understand our physical world using AI. And so that's one other way that Climate Change AI contributes to not only building the skill level, educating folks, doing advocacy, building a community where they organize workshops at major ML conferences. And also, lastly, they do advance the state of the art by funding research grants, long term research grants that help in bringing forth new ideas to life.
One of the things I love about your answer and about this organization is that, for all that many of our listeners are probably technologists trying to understand how they can apply their skills, this really shows that the whole effort, there's no skill that can't be applied to this most meaningful of problems for our entire species, from policy, education, communication, and yes, technology. So you've been in climate tech for a lot of your career, and obviously you've turned it into what you do all day, every day. How did you get started?
That's a great question. I think I had a few lucky breaks on the way. But before Excarta and before Xerox PARC, I was at a PhD program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where I was exploring the early use of AI in engineering research and design. And during that time, I was fortunate to be at Los Alamos National Lab, where I finished part of my dissertation research, where we were the first ones to actually explore deep learning for advancing climate simulations or accelerating climate simulations, so to speak. And that was one of the first efforts in this particular space. And that's where I was exposed to AI as a tool, because before that, most of the folks that were building computer models would actually just use applied math and first principles based physics methods to build these computer models, where to understand our weather systems or our climate systems better. But with the advent of AI, there was a lot of promise back then, which has actually shown to be true in the last few years. So that's where I was first introduced to climate tech. And after graduation, I came out to the Bay Area, was fortunate to work at Xerox PARC, where my manager was a visionary leader who was very interested in building up an AI climate team. And we went out and got grants from DARPA and NASA to build these AI climate emulator models that were quite useful in understanding the impacts of climate change across. And since then, met Vivek and Excarta happened, and yeah, it's been great. So yeah, a lot of lucky breaks, and I think it's also probably being the right place at the right time in some ways. But I think it's still an amazing space for folks to get into. I think this is only getting started. The advent of AI, the use of AI in the world of climate.
I mean, on that topic, Jeffrey Hinton left and he's now working on carbon sinks.
Yeah, and for folks who are inspired by the likes of Anima Anantkumar, I mean, she did an amazing work. She did some amazing work at NVIDIA and Caltech, where she built these tools that are used ubiquitously, from the world of weather intelligence or to carbon sinks, carbon capture, and so on. So I think there is a lot of amazing examples. Jan LeCun was actually talking about it on Twitter the other day, where he was talking about folks to not get into LLMs, building LLMs, but building AI for scientific applications and scientific tools, which also includes quite heavily the impact of climate change.
Monsi knows I'm not prone to optimism, but I have to say that it feels to me like these tools, deep learning, LLMs, even their rightful place of application is on climate change. The scientific acceleration tools that we're seeing, any one of them is worth 1,000 disruptive ways to deliver your toothpaste faster. And I'm really excited to see all these applications. I'm hoping you're going to tell us a little bit more about them a little further on. Can you tell us about Excarta in the field overall?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, as Mansi mentioned in the introduction, we are a Silicon Valley-based seed stage venture-backed startup building an AI weather intelligence platform for businesses. So the main thesis of Excarta is that even if emissions were to stop today, the effects of climate change will linger for quite a while. We are only getting started with the worst effects of it. There are estimates that the world is going to blow past the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold very soon, possibly in the next couple of years, and the rest 2 degrees as well in not too distant future. And some of these extreme events are actually being manifested right in front of our eyes. Like India is going through a persistent heat wave for the last 2 months. I was in India recently. I have never felt that amount of heat ever in my life growing up there. Same story with the US. There was a heat dome last week on the northeast side part of the country, but also severe convective storms have caused a lot of damages to life and property across the Midwest. So the thesis is that in a world which is rapidly warming and the effects of climate change are baked in quite literally, companies and individuals would need access to better weather intelligence and better weather predictions to help them manage what's coming their way. And our approach is to use AI. Our approach is to use the array of amazing data that is out there to build an understanding of how the physical world operates, how the weather systems operate, to help provide advanced warning as well as intelligence in terms of like what should people do if weather event is happening in their area, what evasive actions they should take to reduce damage to life and property. So that's where Excarta comes in, where we provide hyperlocal accurate weather forecast from say a few hours to up to 2 weeks advance notice to companies and individuals to help them prepare for what's coming their way.
All right, now we get to the really fun part. Can you tell us about some of the details of the computational models you employ, the ways you're using the tools? And one of our goals is to show to our listeners that the skills they have are applicable here, and that while there may be some domain-specific knowledge, as there is in any domain, you're going to apply machine learning models or really any of our skills too. Those are learnable, and that the tools you use are ones they're familiar with. So what can you tell us about the models you're using?
That's a fantastic point you made. I think for many folks I meet, they think that there's some magic happening here that's like, totally, one needs a lot of domain knowledge or domain expertise to come and work in the space. That's absolutely not true. In terms of our computational models, I can't go into the details because we are a startup, but I can give you a brief overview of like a very high level overview of what we do. So all of our models are data driven, are purely data driven models, which basically means that we learn from high quality data. And where does this data come from? So the thing is, the weather enterprise has been in the government domain, in the public domain for the last, so many decades, just because of the importance it has on life and property. So because it's publicly funded, most of the data that these sensors or these platforms collect are made publicly available on Google buckets or Amazon buckets and so on. So it makes it a fantastic problem for AI models with the advent of these highly scalable models like transformers, the T in ChatGPT, for example, or graph models and so on, to be able to use this data as well as you mentioned, with some domain knowledge and some physical consistency restrictions to be able to extract meaningful representations or meaningful understanding of how the physical world operates. So in terms of like giving you a flavor of what kind of models we use, as I mentioned in our early versions, we used a lot of transformers, which is the model that revolutionized the field of natural language processing, generative AI, and so on and so forth. But the model is used in a very similar way it is used in the world of NLP or vision transformers. So there's very little modifications that one needs to make this work with climate data, which is fantastic because it's modeled the same way. The climate data is like a sequence of events, it's like a Markovian decision process. So similarly, just the way NLP or vision models are. So it kind of like makes it very easy to use it in these settings. Some of the other models that we have include graph models or a mix of graph and transformer models. And we have, in time to time, put out some of these papers for the community to read. So if somebody's interested, they can look at our website or look at some of these papers on Google Scholar that talks about the methods we have used. And they are not anything that are especially tailor-made for climate. They are pretty much models that are out there. So I think this is an excellent point that we can make here, is that there's obviously a need to learn the physics, the need to learn the intricacies, the idiosyncrasies of the data itself, which comes with any domain. You have to still be very familiar with the data and the restrictions that you're working with. But in terms of algorithm, I think it's very similar to what folks are quite used to working with in the field of LLMs or even other graphs or social networks and so on. That's one of the topics I'll actually talk about in my summer school talk next week, which is demystifying these AI weather models, because I think there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of like doubt about people trying to break into the space thinking like you need specialized understanding or specialized knowledge of these models, whereas actually if you look at it, even if it's customized to a particular data set, it still uses the exact same building blocks. So it's not that huge of a lift for somebody coming in from outside.
Thank you for that detailed answer. I have a question about the data you're accessing. You said a lot of this is provided by, a lot of this is government data, and I assume you meant US government data?
Yes, US and European Union. So just as the US has no, the European Union has
Mm-hmm.
ECMWF, the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting. So they released a lot of data that is available publicly that one
I
can use.
noticed that ECWF has that European data centers have released uh, their Copernicus project, a retroactive recreation of historical data. I was using that for a project the other day.
Yep.
And I was curious as I was working on it, how ecologically valid is that data? If it's reconstructed, are we introducing artifacts, or is it legit to
Yeah.
use that data to
No, I
be?
mean, no, that's a fantastic question. I think Vivek and I looked into it last year, where there are two axes to it. Firstly, how accurate it is for where it is available, the data, and then is there a data equity issue there? For example, is the data more because these things are funded by the Western world, so to speak? Is the data higher quality in the Western world and lower quality in the global South, for example? And what we found was, for the latter point, is that the data distribution is highly skewed towards the Western world, and the data quality is highly skewed towards the Western world, where there is better quality data and observations available. So that is a huge problem where when you're trying to model the weather all over the world, you are kind of flying in the blind a little bit for the global South, so to speak. In terms of like how good are these data sets and how they correct the data sets, so they use, because you have a retroactive data, so to speak, you can look at the satellite observations or the ground-based sensor observations, radar observations, and do this thing called a simulation. So basically, you take the real-world, ground truth gold dust data that actually shows what happened and what your models predicted, and you correct the models based on what actually happened, and then it's a much better data set. It also assumes that you have a uniform coverage of data that you use for simulation. That's not the case. Even in the US, the radar coverage surprisingly is actually fairly sparse in some regions. So basically, those regions suffer a little bit because there are a lot of assumptions and some approximations in these simulations, but still it's far better than not having these things, which is true for some parts of the world. So to your point, these data sets are high quality, depends on where you use them. But again, there are many parts of the world that have a lower quality or lower threshold of data, just because there's very limited observational platforms that actually monitor those parts of the world.
I mean, it's interesting you talk about the data sort of inequity, because you see that not just in weather data, but across any field you touch right now in climate. The global south, the amount of data you have, uh, just the data sets are very, very sparse. But speaking of data, changing gears a little bit, what does a day in Excarta's engineer, what does a day in their life look like? I'm sure you have the same problems like cleansing data and data pipelines and making your MLOps really robust. So tell us a little bit about like just the regular everyday life.
Yeah, no, I think it's really not that dissimilar from any tech company. I think it's depending on what side of the fence you're manning, so to speak. Like the folks, the team members that are looking at the front end side of things, the team members that are looking at back end. Vivek and I do most of the modeling, so it's like basically the same thing as you just mentioned. It's a lot of data wrangling, ensuring that the data is consistent and so on and so forth. What does the data distribution look like? What are we trying to model? So then we choose the right appropriate model, keeping the GPUs happy. So basically a lot of data pipeline option, figuring out that stuff as well. And as well as a bunch of evaluations. So basically it just looks exactly like what any other role would look like that wrangles with data. Similarly with the backend as well, a bunch of Kubernetes clusters serving these forecasts and a bunch of standard infrastructure that is commonly used in most tech companies. And same with front end as well, the same languages like React and all that, like used to build these platforms, these amazing visual representations that we have built for our customers. So I think in terms of like how does it look like, it's very similar as you mentioned. A lot of data cleaning, a lot of like model training, a lot of model evaluations, a lot of ML ops, a lot of DevOps, and so on.
Okay, okay. Yeah. So switching to a little bit on the business side, if you have to think about your revenue streams, and I believe that any climate impact without a direct business impact is usually harder to have wings. And so I suspect you have a strong revenue stream that incentivizes your end customers to make better climate decisions. I know the question is a bit abstract, but can you build it out for us and help us see how one relates to the other?
No, absolutely. Your point is very, very accurate. It's spot on that at the end of the day, we are in the business of building a business, right? Like the investors that have invested in us, our clients are looking to get some savings, looking to protect their assets and so on and so forth, whatever form that savings look like or whatever form that efficiency looks like for them. So at the end of the day, any climate enterprise has to make a good business sense, has to be in a market that's scalable, has to have technology that's enough differentiable compared to the peers, or at least the user experience. I mean, sometimes it doesn't really need to be a new technology; it has to be the entire user experience, so to speak. So I think at the end of the day, the same challenges persist like any B2B companies with us. In terms of like, I can't go into the revenue stuff because we are a startup, but I can tell you the personas of customers that we have currently. So basically, as I mentioned, weather impacts everybody, whether impacts you and I, whether impacts anybody, any person on this on the street, so to speak. And similarly, weather impacts businesses as well. So, and weather impact is also very dependent on the time scale. What I mean by that is some weather impacts are felt in the next few hours, some weather impacts are felt in the next 2 days when you have to make decisions for certain things. And I'll give an example for each of them. And some weather impacts are actually felt out a week out or 2 weeks out and so on. Some because decisions are made on those timelines. For example, for the very short term, like between 1 hour to 6 hour to 12 hours of decision making, think of it like if you are in the Midwest and you are supposed to get a hailstorm. So what we do is like we have a bunch of customers that we alert saying that, hey, there is a hailstorm coming your way between this time to that time. So please take preventative or evasive actions. And that's the entire point of providing a weather intelligence, which is to not only give them a weather forecast, but also tell them what is going to happen, what kind of actions can you take to prevent damage or to do whatever you need to do to maximize that information. And then hopefully that leads to a change in behavior. I think that's a full circle. I mean, unless that changes behavior, I think you don't have a business there. So similarly for the, just to continue with the example of hail. So we inform our customers saying that, hey, there is a hail coming your way. Please take preventative actions, move your car in a garage. If you don't have a garage, place it under a tree. If you don't have that, put a hail cover. Same things with other assets as well. Like if you have cattle, just bring them in or do something to kind of like prevent the damage. And this is something that's, also this helps insurance as well, because insurance does not have to pay out there because they run on such tight margins that they can, at least see increased profitability. There are multiple news reports that came out of New York Times earlier this summer, which showed that this even early on in the month of May, which is very early in the convective season, severe convective season in the Midwest, there were so many damages that a lot of insurers moved out or pulled out of Iowa, states like that. We hear about insurers moving out of California and Florida, but I was surprised to hear insurers move out of Midwest just because the damage from hailstorms and stuff is actually quite debilitating to their business. So this is a way for us to help the insurers, to help the end users stay in the market, reduce the damage, reduce the claims, and also change decisions, change their behavior based on that. Now, going on to some of the other customers that we work with, for example, as the world transition moves towards renewable energy, the weather volatility is actually quite getting really, challenging to handle. 80% of the new power that comes onto the US grid is renewables, which means that while it's great for the environment, it's also very, very volatile for these grids to manage the load on them. And as the need for AI and data centers increases, there is an artificial demand as well that is being put on these grids that makes it that much harder, on top of the impacts of extreme weather such as extreme cold or extreme heat days that we see in different seasons, different parts of the country. So we work with renewable energy companies. Renewable energy companies have to commit to the grid a day in advance of how much power they're going to generate the next day. And if they undercommit or overcommit, they typically have to pay a huge penalty. So we work with them to help them understand what the weather is going to be the next day so that they can operationally plan better as well as commit to the grid a more reasonable number. Similarly, hedge funds and trading firms that operate in these markets in terms of pricing energy products use our forecasts to make their decisions as well, make the decision making based on the load given. For example, at ERCOT, what is the load going to be ERCOT wide, or what is the load going to be at a particular part of a sub region of the ERCOT power grid. We work a bit with agriculture as well. For example, ag tech companies use our forecasts to manage their farm operations. For example, when to optimally spray fertilizers on the plants. That's a hugely important thing for farming operations, especially. It is very weather dependent given how much moisture there is in the soil, how much humidity is in the air, what is the temperature, and so on. Pest control is another thing that actually is very weather dependent. So understanding weather patterns and how the weather patterns are going to shift a week in advance or 2 weeks in advance can help inform farmers if there's going to be a pest outbreak for their particular crops and so on. So I think so we work with insurance, we work with direct consumers, we work with energy customers, we work with hedge funds, we work with ag tech, and so on. So I think whoever we work with, it looks quite different. They have their particular use case, but I think it just goes to show that a weather product or a better weather information is something that is critically needed by industries to make even the most basic of decisions. And I think with a world that is seeing rapid shifts in weather, especially severe convective weather, this is quite important area to explore.
I mean, all of those actually sound like extremely important value propositions, right? Anyone could see the benefit. Are the investors seeing these benefits? Are the investors seeing upside? Is capital flowing into this market, or are there other streams of funding available for any new company entering climate space?
No, that's a great question. I think we have been very fortunate to have a great set of investors who believe in the vision, who believe in the team, who believe in what we are building. And there are quite a few of them out there as well that are doing some fantastic work backing these groundbreaking, revolutionary companies that are making impactful, meaningful change in the world. But to answer your question, there is definitely a lot of capital that is out there. Again, in the last couple of years, because of the interest rates, things have gotten slower. But if you look at any analysis from, say, Carta, which is this equity platform for most startups, they put out these numbers every now and then, which is quite interesting to see, like how AI climate tech has, definitely seen a dip in terms of like the deals sizes and the deals volumes, but still quite better than other domains, comparatively. So I think there's still a lot of interest. There's a lot of new venture funds, venture firms that are like coming up, and there are like amazing players like Sophie Purdom and others that are like doing some very impactful work in this space, opening their own Planeteer Capital like initiatives. In terms of like access to funds, I think with climate tech, it's a bit different than other enterprises, because a lot of these businesses are very technical, very deep tech businesses. So there are a lot of accelerators that actually understand the challenges in building deep tech solutions, which take time, potentially revolutionary, but most of them don't really make it just because it's a very, very hard endeavor. So there are a lot of accelerators like that that one could explore. Even YC has said that they want to include more and more climate companies. They actually have a weather intelligence company in the most recent cohort, which was quite nice to see. Although they'll be a competitor, but more the merrier, right? So the other way I think, which is quite exciting, I'm excited about, is non-dilutive funding. I think because the importance of climate change and the current administration in the US, which is very favorable to supporting enterprises or businesses to take the risk. Government has passed laws like the IRA Inflation Reduction Act, which has brought in billions of dollars into different aspects of the climate enterprise, so to speak. So depending on the domain you are in, especially if you're in EV charging or electric vehicles and carbon capture and so on, there are massive grants that the government gives out every now and then. And one of the companies that a friend has, Helena Merck, is called Streamline Climate, which actually helps companies look at non-dilutive sources of funding. So funding from government, federal government, state government, local governments. So that gives out these grants that you can actually get without giving away any equity in your company to build solutions that are still within the realm of what you want to build, but also you don't have any dilutions, which can be quite expensive at this point just because of the interest rates. And there is obviously the funder of, so to speak, last resorts, the National Science Foundation seed grant, which is an amazing initiative that actually gives out about $2 million in 2 phases to companies that are building transformational technologies, not just related to climate, but almost anything. I would encourage people to look at it. It's a non-dilutive source of funding. It's very prestigious, brings in a lot of reputation into your product, kind of external validation, so to speak, to get funding from NSF. So I think there are many sources like that. I think dilutive, non-dilutive funding, great VC firms as well, great accelerators, and so on.
I said earlier I'm not prone to optimism, and I'm going to say a second optimistic thing in one day. It's kind of hard to believe. But seriously, when I see, I do, everyone sees investments being much harder to make in a lot of fields. When I see investment in climate tech not suffering as much as other fields in a climate like this, it gives me an extraordinary amount of hope. I love seeing that the IRA is actually landing and the money really is out there. And it does seem to be a burgeoning field. There aren't a lot of things.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's very true that even today, there are events going on a random Wednesday before July 4th that are bringing in people from investors or entrepreneurs or even scientists and engineers to kind of have these events and conversations to see how to help scale up companies in geoengineering or other areas of material science and so on. So it's to your point, there are amazing opportunities out there, especially if you're building in climate. It's not easy for sure, because there's a lot of very hard problems to be solved. And some of these problems don't have obvious solutions. Again, as Mansi mentioned earlier, that just building a climate enterprise wouldn't get you customers. You still have to win the customers the old school way, which is to show them the value to your product, the time to value, and so on and so forth. So I think those challenges still remain, but I think it's an amazing area where at least there is a lot of institutional support. There's a lot of amazing folks in the community. It's a very supportive community, but also there is a real impact to be had in what you do. I think that is above all for me the biggest motivator of why we do this so every day.
I have personally experienced that as well. And you even said just now, this new company will be a competitor, but the more the merrier. I hear that a lot in the climate space and in talking to climate companies. They have a genuine problem to solve, and they're actually eager to see it solved. They don't necessarily see these people as competitors, yes, in one sense, but we're all trying to actually accomplish something, again, more valuable than targeting our advertising a little bit better. So they actually really welcome that competition and innovation. It's an exciting space to be in. And I have found the community really supportive, even at an individual level. Everyone I talk to is eager to find out how they can help me moving into climate, other people moving into climate, whether they know the space or whether, in their space or in another. So what would you say to ML engineers who are interested in moving into the climate world?
No, I think just do it. As Nike says it famously, just do it. So, because I think as we talked about, right, in our conversation, there's a myth that one needs a very expert domain knowledge to get into it. That's true. That's obviously true for many different fields, and even in our company as well, that we need domain specific understanding and knowledge of what we are dealing with. But if you look at the algorithms, if you look at the rest of the process that supports that endeavor, a lot of it is just daily engineering, very good engineering that is similar to what you see in other tech companies. So I think, and I firmly believe that anybody can learn anything if they're interested enough. So I think if somebody is interested enough to learn any stuff about how the carbon markets work, so to speak, or how the EV charging industry works, or how the material industry works, and so on, they can learn that. I mean, I think it's not rocket science. People before us have done that. So I think I would strongly recommend just talk to people that are working in the space, try to understand what your interests are in terms of what you want to do, and where your skills are, so to speak, and then try to find a good fit. There are a lot of climate companies that are hiring actively, so there are a lot of amazing job boards as well. Like ClimateChange.AI has a very nice newsletter and a job board that you can look into. There are so many others as well, TerraDo and Climate Base and all that. So I think there's amazing resources out there. So talk to people. Don't be afraid to reach out to people. But I think it's easier than you think. I would strongly, if there's one thing that they remember from this entire conversation, I would just say it's easier than you think, and just do it.
Well, thank you, Peetak, for joining us today and really shedding light on how AI is helping climate change or climate action. And I really hope that this discussion will pique at least a few people's interest to dig deeper and find resources and learn a few more things about the space and potentially transition into this climate fight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mansi and Joshua. I think this was amazing. I think, if anybody has any questions, I'm available on LinkedIn. So please feel free to shoot me a message. But again, congratulations on this great initiative. I wish you both all the luck in the world. I think this is a very important work that is being done right now, right here, which is inspiring and demystifying what it takes to have a career in climate tech. And even if you inspire a few people here, I think the job will be
Thank
done.
you.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
Thank
good
you
thank
so
job.
you so
much.
much. Thank you for listening to ClimateStack. If you enjoyed the show or would like to hear about any specific climate topics, please leave us a review or let us know on our website linked in the show notes. Before closing out though, I want to give a big shout out to 90, a climate co-working space launched during San Francisco Climate Week here in the city and our show's official home base. 90 is the hub for all things climate. Startups, investors, corporations, service providers, policymakers, academics. If you're working towards a healthier, more resilient world, you belong at 90. You can check them out in person or at www.90.com.